back on the 0 Hour. I am your ever loyal host, Richard RJ Eskow. And joining us now, once again, we haven't talked to him for a while. We always look forward to it, is the editor of Current Affairs magazine, author, columnist, man of many trades and many hats, none of which he is wearing at the moment. But Nathan J. Robinson, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Hey, nice to be with you, RJ. Always fun.
Oh, always great to have you on. And obviously, the story of the week is the Democratic convention, which I have been dutifully watching, and then, changing the channel, and then coming back, and then changing the channel again, and then coming back. And I think it exists on multiple levels. One is as something you watch, and then as something you watch the reaction to. It's like a meteorite. You may not see it, but you study the crater, the blast crater.
Yes, I've been studying the crater.
You've been studying the crater. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, let's say this. The Democratic convention seems to embody very well the spirit of the contemporary Democratic Party. That is my diplomatic way of saying that they have put on a convention that is very much themselves.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that the sort of infomercial feel of it, the sort of up with people cheerfulness, sometimes moving, but often devoid of deep emotion or reflection or the gravity of the historical moment or the urgency, the need for many millions of people and so on. Yeah, I would say you've made a fair statement. But let's talk a little bit about the presidential ticket itself, about Biden-Harris, because you wrote a piece and I wrote a piece recently, and the pieces were overlapped in many ways. What I wrote was a message to the left about the selection of Kamala Harris, and basically saying, the actors in the political drama in the coming years are going to be us on the left, to the extent that we're willing to take on the task, and that no, Biden and Harris aren't people who necessarily reflect what we want, the policies we want, the values we want, but that we're more likely to advance our causes further if they become president and vice president than if we have 4 more years of Trump-Pence. And I didn't do it from quite the tactical perspective you did. Mine was more 50,000 feet, I guess. But man, I got flack for it. And that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I knew it, right? So what basically is your take? Why would you say that it makes better tactical sense to have a Biden-Harris administration than 4 more years of Trump?
Look, the first thing is, let's just be clear. I'm not happy about saying it. And I think one of the reasons that people get so upset, I'm very sympathetic to people who are upset and frustrated when you say that you think that Joe Biden is technically the lesser evil and that we need to get Trump out. Because, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have treated the left with such utter contempt, essentially, right? I mean, Biden spreading insurance industry talking points about Medicare for all. Kamala is responsible for so many of the aspects of the criminal punishment system that are now being protested against, and so it feels like we're being insulted, and then to turn around and say we're going to help this pair get into the highest offices in the land. It feels like an affront to your dignity in a certain way. And the worst thing is they've got us kind of in a corner, because it's true, right? The argument they made, the reason they're able to sort of rub our faces in the sand is because we all know that Donald Trump is exactly as horrifying as everyone says. That 4 more years means the disappearance of many, many more environmental regulations, labor protections, the mass disenfranchisement of millions of people, the packing of the courts with far right judges. I mean, it's very, very scary. Right. I wonder if there will be another presidential election if Donald Trump gets a second term. And so many people are dead of the coronavirus. Right. I mean, it's just so horrifying. And at this point, Biden is our only other option, that, we really are just as stuck as the Democrats say we are, where they say, but no one wants to accept, well, if you don't support Biden, you're supporting Trump, because they say, well, excuse me, I am a principled person. I'm not supporting Biden because Biden does not embody my values, and I refuse to accept this lesser evil logic that requires me to vote for the least repulsive person. My perspective is, look, let's get him. Let's admit that he is better than Trump and that we need to get Trump out, but in voting for him, let us not accept any of the arguments that he is good. So let us be honest about what is going on and what we are trying to do. We are solely trying to marginally improve our strategic position by getting a slightly less worse candidate in. We are not endorsing Biden's record. We are not endorsing him as a person. We are just trying, it's just a harm prevention measure. And if we do that, if we say we're going to vote for Biden, then I think we're on even stronger grounds to criticize Biden, because then they can say, oh, you're helping Trump. He said, I'm not helping Trump. I want to get Biden elected. I'm going to help Biden, but I'm not going to lie for the party because I think that's harmful.
Yeah, and I have several thoughts about that. One is I share your respect for people who don't agree with me or you on this particular point in this particular moment. Maybe they will change their position, some of them, but whether they do or don't, I think all the people haranguing me in the Democratic Party universe from the right, that is, silence your criticisms and get on board, and are just dragging leftists who won't say that they'll support and vote for Biden, are doing a couple of really bad things. Number one is they're not respecting different viewpoints, which is one of the things they're always dragging Trump and the Republicans about. They're doing the same thing. They're dismissing people who don't want to vote for the candidate. I think that's inherently wrong, number one. Number two, they all go around and say, oh, your little lefty fifis are hurt and your fifis, your feelings are more important than the election. Well, no, that's what you're doing, because it's more important to you to rant at leftists, perhaps because deep in your heart you suspect they're more right than you are. It's so incumbent. You feel so compelled to do it that you're driving them away from voting for your person, which means you're putting your fifis in front of the defeating Trump.
That's such an important point. And what it reminds me of is 2000 and Nader, right? After 2000, the logical reaction from the Democratic Party should have been, well, all these people went and voted for Ralph Nader, and it cost us the election. Right. If those people had come with us, we would have won. So what do we do next time to bring those people into the fold? What do we do to make sure that they don't depart and vote third party? And, Ralph Nader, in fact, went to John Kerry and said, here, you adopt a few of these planks of my platform and I won't run against you. And, of course, the Democrats just laughed. And they heaped contempt on Ralph Nader, contempt on Nader voters. And you think, well, but that's not a pragmatic attempt to avoid a Republican reelection. That's just a way to find a scapegoat. If you really were a pragmatic person, you would be saying, we're sorry, Nader voters, that you didn't like the Democrat. Here's how the Democratic Party is going to remake itself so that you don't feel the need to go somewhere else. And so, I think you're absolutely right that this is not the attempted extortion at saying, so you're going to get Trump elected, or this heaping scorn on the left, that in itself is not, in fact, something that is done out of a carefully considered strategic effort to prevent Trump's reelection. It seems more like something that is done so that they have someone to blame when they lose.
And I also think it's ideologically motivated. I mean, let's look at another group. A lot of people said, if you don't choose a black woman for vice president, we won't vote the Democratic ticket. We're tired of being taken advantage of. We're tired of being assumed. We're done. And if you don't do something for us, we're not going to vote for you. Well, good for them. I mean, that's politics, right? Sometimes you make a tough deal. You say, look, to get my support, this is what you've got to do. When the left does it, they're excoriated the way you just described, Nathan J. Robinson. When other groups do it, it's like, okay, let's see what we can do. So what I take away from that is not that there's anything wrong with the other groups, but that it's ideologically driven, that there are certain decisions that don't require you to take a different economic position on a minimum wage, on increasing unionization, on redistribution of wealth, whatever it may be, Medicare for all. There are certain decisions that the controlling interests of the party and a lot of its sort of, to use that word, PMC, professional managerial class members are ideologically not, it's indifferent to them ideologically. So yes, they'll go along with it. But if that demand is made on behalf of working people in an economic way that challenges their ideology, they'll say, how dare you consider not supporting us? To me, there's got to be, either consciously or unconsciously, an ideological motivator in there. What do you think?
Yeah, and leftists who don't want to vote for Biden raise a good point often, where they say, look, if we demonstrate ourselves to just be willing to settle for whoever the Democratic Party picks, and we don't make demands of them, and we don't say that there is some threshold, and if you cross that threshold, we won't vote for you. If they don't say that, if they don't make demands and show that they're willing to act on their threat, then there's no incentive for them to be accommodated, right? If we are just loyal foot soldiers for the party, why would they ever listen to us when we say that we want X, Y, or Z, or will walk? You have to be willing to walk. It has to be a real threat. I get that logic, right? That is what I'm always given, which is, you just settle for the lesser evil. It's going to get a worse and worse evil over time. We can't do this every time. Where I think it goes wrong a little bit is I actually don't think that the Democratic Party leadership is particularly strategically savvy in a certain way, right? Again, if you look back at the Nader thing, the strategically savvy thing was, we walked, now you have to meet our demands. But they didn't meet our demands. They would almost rather lose than make concessions. And I think if Biden, look at Hillary Clinton, 2016. If Hillary Clinton had picked Bernie Sanders as her vice presidential nominee instead of Tim Kaine, she would have become president. Like, that was clearly strategically, you just nearly lost the primary to a guy who has a huge following, a huge movement. Make him the VP, and then he'll help you win, right? And Bernie Sanders did, in fact, go out and try to help Hillary Clinton, but she made it clear that she was not really interested in courting the left. Well, that was a poor strategic decision. You could say, well, because she didn't do it, we showed that you have to court the left if you're going to win. But here we are in 2020. None of the lessons have actually been learned. They're doing the same thing all over again. So, we can cause the Democratic nominee to lose, but that does not, in fact, make the center of the Democratic Party any better, because they're ideologically committed to what they do, rather than even caring that much about seeking power, because we would be helpful to them in seeking power. You got to win primaries. You got to run against them in primaries. You got to defeat them. But if you lose the primary, the threat of not voting for them in a general election doesn't actually get you the kind of leverage that is the thing that we assume that we need and get out of that.
I think that's essentially right, Nathan J. Robinson, with one thing I would add to it, which is I think there are a lot of people within the Democratic Party structure, meaning within the party itself, and in the kind of think tanks and orbiting media and other worlds around it. It's in their self-interest so much not to see a dramatic shift to the left in the party that they actually would prefer to lose elections based on the current strategy and configuration, strictly out of self-interest, than to lose their positions, see them replaced with a more left-leaning party infrastructure, and have that party win, because then they're out, right? Yeah. So I think that's also a factor. Now, there will be people saying from the less lefty than you or me side of all of this that, well, Joe Biden has put together the most progressive platform yet from the Democratic Party. I wouldn't say it's more progressive than Roosevelt's, but the gist being that he's calling for stronger Social Security. He wants to do a little more on health, etc. What do you think of that argument?
Oh, how many times are we supposed to be fooled by this, right? I mean, I remember all of Barack Obama's anti-Wall Street rhetoric on the campaign trail. I remember that Hillary Clinton, in fact, the Democratic platform was extremely progressive. Do we not understand that if a politician suddenly at election time mysteriously and strangely pivots from the things that they have believed and done all of their entire career and suddenly says that they agree with you and they believe all the things that you believe, and they are going to enact all of the things that you're asking them to, are we not a little suspicious that maybe they might be telling us what they think we want to hear? So I don't have any confidence that Joe Biden would follow through on any of that. In fact, you've seen that Joe Biden first promised like a deportation moratorium and then, of course, backed off on it. And I think you'll see he will back off on pretty much everything. And we'll say, but hang on, you made it, you ran on the platform, you had a commitment. But unless there's like some actual mechanism for ensuring that they follow through on these things. And the other thing is, it's not really as they're presenting it as the most progressive, but always beware relative terms. They say he'd be the most progressive president in, well, who are the other presidents, right? The Democratic Party presidents have been mostly centrists. So it's not actually difficult to be the most progressive president since Roosevelt. And if you look at things like lowering Medicare age from 65 to 60 or whatever, this is something that conservative Democrats have been proposing since the 1990s. They've been even saying 55. So there's this attempt to, and you can see where it comes from, which is a bunch of people sitting in a room going, how can we do, what agenda items can we pick that sound like they are concessions to the progressive wing of the party, but aren't really concessions and that we can back away from later. So obviously Joe Biden is absolutely not going to endorse single-payer health care because that's like a real serious thing that a reversal would look like a real reversal. But maybe we can toss out some things that have actually been tossed around in think tanks for 20 years and maybe we'll do a couple of them. I mean, you can see the entire logic that drives this. It's politically calculating and unprincipled, and we know what's underneath it all.
So again, here's another, and again, we're talking with Nathan J. Robinson, editor of Current Affairs and author. Here's an argument I made that I got pushed back on heavily, and maybe I was wrong, but I kind of think I was right, which is I said that if you look at a Biden and Harris administration versus another Trump-Pence administration, Biden and Harris are more likely to be influenced or persuaded by a mass movement of people, largely consisting of their base, I would say, demanding something than a Trump-Pence administration has been. And the answer I got was, well, you think they'll be influenced by anybody except the lobbyists that they're going to appoint to senior positions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I get that argument, but I kind of think I'm right. But
no, you are right. You're right. No, you're absolutely. People, it's important to be cynical, but not any more cynical than the facts warrant. Right? You have to be just as cynical as necessary and no more. The fact is that Democrats are able to be pressured a bit. Right? They are ideological, but they're not entirely ideological. They're also unprincipled. Right, so these are the two parts of being someone like Joe Biden is an ideological commitment to centrist politics, but also a real lack of commitment to anything beyond that which is politically expedient, which means that external factors and external pressure can in fact alter what they do. If you change the calculus of self-interest for them, they will bend in the direction that you want them to a certain degree. So, for example, the Sunrise Movement managed to get Biden to adopt a more progressive climate platform. In fact, much better. They managed to make it much better through activism and through pressure. And because Joe Biden wanted to get the Sunrise Movement on board, they made some concessions. Now, you could say, as I do, well, he's not going to follow through with that, probably, which he's not going to want to follow through with that. That's absolutely true. But if you keep up pressure, if you make sure that you are a force that they want during their re-election campaign, if you make sure that if political horse trading happens, right, and if you to the extent that you build yourself up as a political force, I mean, they've made it clear, for example, in this race, that they don't feel like they need AOC to do much for them. But the more powerful she becomes, the more AOC's word makes or breaks a candidate, right? A congressional candidate, for instance, where her weighing in on a race can affect whether a Democrat stays in power or loses, the more the ability she has to extract concessions. So politics is a game of power, and we can play that game. And just because someone is hostile to us does not mean we can't extract some things from them. But as you say, Trump and Pence is very, very different. I mean, we can get things for labor, for the environment, for immigrant groups from the Democrats. Some things, they're always disappointing, but we can get some things. We're not going to get any of that stuff from Trump and Pence because they want to destroy us. If Trump and Pence had their ways, they'd put the leaders of Black Lives Matter in federal prison. These are real nasty authoritarians who are trying to actively destroy us, not just kind of unprincipled people who go whichever way the wind is blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the lines that did resonate with me at this convention was when Michelle Obama said, if you don't think things can get worse, I don't remember the exact words, but the gist was, if you don't think things can get a lot worse, trust me, they can. That I definitely believe. Things have been very, Trump, I spent years saying, the Democrats are crying wolf about calling Trump fascist when he did A or B, and George W. Bush, who they love, his body count is way higher, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem with crying wolf is now he's doing genuinely totalitarian things. I was like, you've been saying this all along. I'm really worried about what would happen with another 4 years of Trump. And you just made a point that I made in my piece, which was that Biden and Harris, first of all, I still say that Biden seems to be a very genial guy on a personal level, but he has no core ideology that I can discern other than whatever agreements and deals. He's like a patchwork quilt made up of, past trade-offs. He doesn't have a core ideology. Kamala Harris changed her position on Medicare for all so fast. It was like when those UFOs.
It was overnight.
Do a right turn that's so sharp it defies the laws of physics. That was like so. But that's like my favorite thing about them at this point, because because it means we can pressure them, and so I think we agree that tactically it makes sense to want these two to do what we can to get these two reelected, while at the same time being absolutely blunt. I mean, I can hold two thoughts in my head at once.
Right.
One of which is that Biden seems to be a genuinely affable guy who likes, elevator operators and regular people, and that's good about, that's nice. And that he and I have different, to the extent that he has an ideology, we have different ones. In a normal system, we'd be in different political parties, okay? But we're not in a normal political system. So tactically, I want him to get in. But at the same time, I don't want to rhetorically embrace the positions he takes that I disagree with. He opposes Medicare for all. I support it. He, is promoting a lot of bellicose military people who I do not think, should be part of it. So, how do you, in your mind, how do you strike that nuance of, this is the right tactical decision, but at the same time, we can't be silent about our areas of disagreement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as you say. It's just a matter of holding two thoughts in your head at the same time. I mean, I think when you say the difficulty is the moment you say you think Biden is better than Trump, people, what they hear is they hear you joining the side of the people who are trying to extort them and shame them and say, if you don't help us get this horrible candidate elected, you are the reason that Trump gets reelected. And so I think it's just important to make sure you place equal emphasis on the two halves of it. You can't just say, I think you should vote for Biden. You have to say, I think you should vote for Biden with open eyes about who Biden is, with open eyes about the fact that the reason that we're saying that Biden is a better president is because we don't want to spend the next 4 years fighting a defensive action against an actively authoritarian presidency that is trying its best to destroy us, because that's gonna all of our energy is gonna be spent trying to keep the administration from yanking protesters off the street and putting them into unmarked vans, right? We need to get rid of that. And then we will have space to organize, because Biden and Harris are not going to be particularly effective people. They are not, as we've said, particularly ideological people. They're mostly self-interested. And that will buy us a little bit of sort of political breathing room to organize a left that can overthrow their wing of the Democratic Party. But we have to be clear that that is the mission. The mission is to make sure that the politics they represent gets ousted. We are getting them into power solely as a strategic measure. And I think if you say that and you're very clear about that, and you don't say that, there's some kind of that Biden is in any way embodies our values, but you emphasize the strategic point. You emphasize why you're saying what we ought to do, what we say we ought to do, which is vote for him and get him into power and then try and overthrow him. Then I think maybe people be a little more responsive, because you're showing them some kind of respect. You're showing them that you understand their position, and you're not just trying to shame them or blame them for Trump's reelection.
I think that's well said. And the only other dimension of this, I think that I've been thinking about for years, actually, is that to do any of this effectively, we have to emancipate ourselves from the mental slavery of idealizing presidential candidates. But somehow in this country, I think more than in others, we have a tradition of putting presidential candidates, presidents up on pedestals, literally as well as metaphorically, instead of saying, tools to be used in one way or another. We have a tendency to say, well, if I go out and say, vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I'm saying I think that out of 330 million Americans, they're the two best that ever lived.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying as a tactical decision, I believe, what Ella Baker said, strong people don't need strong leaders. let's be a strong people and, not need, not stop looking for the next JFK that everybody can, or Che Guevara or whatever that everybody can put on a poster, and just start saying, well, there are going to be people in an office. We're going to have to pressure them, and you work with them and work against them and do whatever we have to do. Now, tactically, what's the right move? As now that we've divorced ourselves from this sentimental attachment. I don't know what you think of that, but
it's not just sentimental attachment to candidates. It's also about voting. It's something about the vote itself, because there is this tendency to see the act of casting a ballot in this kind of romantic way, which is by casting a ballot for someone, I give my endorsement to them. I am saying they are the person that I want. A vote is an expression of my values. So I vote third party if my values are third party. I have, and this is, Noam Chomsky makes this argument very well, which is voting is a tiny thing. First off, it should take 5 minutes of your thought, and you should think about it in a purely consequentialist way, which is that what matters about your vote is the effect that your vote will have, whether it will make one outcome or another marginally more probable out of the available range of outcomes. Frankly, there are conceivable situations in which I would vote for a Republican. If we were facing, say, an election where there was a Nazi versus a Republican, right? I vote for the Republican. And some people say, I will never vote for a Republican because they're horrifying. I agree that they're horrifying. I'm no less horrified, but I see the vote as a tool of strategy and not as an expression of who I am or what I really want in an underlying sense. I am trying to bring about politically favorable outcomes for my side. And the fact is that right now, in the situation we face at the moment, with circumstances arranged as they are, it is better for the left if this one outcome, the election of Biden, occurs versus the other outcome, the election of Trump. And that is the only perspective that I think about this from, is what helps the left get done what it wants to get done.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, I'm not always a utilitarian in my personal philosophy, but I think in this case is very apt. Last question, I guess, unfair one, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Optimistic or pessimistic about what will happen in November, Biden versus Trump?
I really don't know. It's so uncertain. Right. I wrote stuff last year that was all about why they shouldn't nominate Biden because he was a horrible candidate against Trump. And I look back and I agree with a lot of what I said. But then the pandemic happened and everything kind of changed. And, hundreds of thousands of people are dead now and the economy has collapsed. And you can say, well, how is a president ever going to win re-election? But at the same time, Trump has a formidable organizing and fundraising apparatus. The Joe Biden strategy is mostly to kind of lay low and not provoke any controversy and just be the other guy on the ballot and do it as a referendum on Trump. I think I really hesitate to make predictions because I think everything is so chaotic and uncertain. We have never been in circumstances like this. We do not know what is going to happen. The polls look Biden, but they also have shifted towards Trump recently. They could keep shifting towards Trump. I think we should treat this election not in an optimistic or pessimistic fashion, but what we should say is we assume that we are going to lose because we don't know. And so we assume that the situation is very bad for us. And then we have to act as if the situation is bad for us. And we need to turn it around by doing everything possible we can to make sure that Trump loses. If you don't view it that way, then you run the risk that you are going to be horribly surprised come November, where the situation that you thought existed turned out to be very different from the situation that actually existed. And behind the scenes, Trump was organizing people. They're going around knocking 1 million doors a week. I mean, that's homicidally crazy during COVID, but they're doing it 1 million doors a week. So I think we need to operate on the assumption that Trump will probably get reelected and then do everything possible to try and stop that outcome.
I think that's an excellent operating philosophy and consistent with my long-standing personal reaction that when Democrats get optimistic, I get nervous. So I think,
yes,
in this case, I think that's a constructive approach. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Time always flies when we talk about Nathan J. Robinson, editor of Current Affairs. And if you're not reading Current Affairs, you should be, an author of a number of fine books. As always, great talking with you. As always, thanks for coming on the program.
Nice to talk to you, RJ. Thanks so much. It was fun.
All the best. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.